Hey y'all, so today I'm going to be kind of doing a bit of a discussion and a wrap-up video talking about my experience with the KonMari process. Also, I'm a bit sick today, so if I sound a little nasally, that's why. So if you haven't seen my other videos in my KonMari series, I will leave a playlist up in the cards, but essentially if you're unaware, the KonMari method is a method of decluttering that is detailed in The Life-Changing Magic of Tidying Up by Marie Kondo. I read this near the end of April and I started to apply the KonMari method to my life, and I've filmed the process, so like I said, up in the cards. But today I just kind of wanted to talk about my experiences while going through the process and what I feel like I learned from this book and what my overall takeaways are. Like with every video in this series, I'm going to briefly talk about the main points of the KonMari method just so anyone who doesn't know what this is vaguely aware of what it is. So there are two main steps to this process and they have to be done completely separately. The first is discarding and then organizing. When discarding items, you go category by category rather than location by location, holding every single item and asking if it sparks joy. If it does spark joy, it's something that you keep. If it doesn't spark joy, then it's something that you should discard. Obviously, with more practical things such as paperwork or kitchen utensils, you don't really ask yourself whether it sparks joy, but if it has some sort of meaning or purpose in your life. And there are several different categories that KonMari lays out in this book that you're supposed to go through while you declutter things. And all those categories are laid out within this book, and by the end of it, you're supposed to have a clutter-free life. I've talked about this in some other videos, but I did want to talk about it in this video since this is kind of my review slash wrap-up. But basically, I saw a lot of negative reviews of this book on Goodreads, and I was kind of confused at first. But when I started reading them, I realized that a lot of them were really focusing on some of the aspects that I have deemed cutesy or new agey. Meaning that Marie Kondo is deemed by some to be insane. And while I think that that's definitely not the correct word to use to describe her, I think that she has some very odd quirks that she tries to instill as decluttering tactics. For example, she says that when you come home, you should greet your home and you should feel the energy of objects, and that when you discard objects, you should thank them for their service. And on top of that, there's this whole idea of sparking joy and everything being related to all of these feelings that you're supposed to get just from touching an item. And I feel like a lot of people focus on these aspects that may seem really ridiculous to some. I'm definitely one of those people. I am a very unemotional person, so the idea of something sparking joy was something that was very foreign to me, especially when just holding an item. And obviously, I'm never going to be greeting my apartment when I come home, or thanking my belongings, or just in general talking to my belongings, because I think that's weird. But I think that when you get past all of those weird oddities that Marie Kondo lays out, I think that you're left with a decluttering system that for me was incredibly helpful. I'm not sure that it's the most mind-blowing, life-changing, groundbreaking decluttering process, but for me it was definitely something that I needed to hear because I am an incredibly messy person. I've always kind of worn my messiness as a badge of honor, because all of those pseudo-psychology studies are people who are messier are more creative and more intelligent, and I always kind of wore that as a badge of honor, but I've kind of realized that decluttering my life just makes my entire life simpler. And this process for me was really, really helpful for that. I feel like it not only decluttered my belongings, but also kind of my state of mind and my overall mindset. So as I've mentioned, one of the more touchy-feely, cutesy, new agey, I don't know what term I'm using to describe it, but one of the more quirky, odd things about the process is this idea of sparking joy that's really, really central to deciding what you keep and what you discard. And this was something that I immediately struggled with, because even if I were to pick up I'll Give You the Sun by Jandy Nelson, which is a book that I absolutely love, I don't get any sort of emotional reaction to just holding this book. It's a book that I really enjoy, but I don't feel more happy or sad just by holding it. To make matters worse, when I Googled it and I was kind of trying to see what Marie Kondo personally described as sparking joy, I found all these videos of her having this very physical reaction to items. And obviously that's her physical display of inward feelings, but like that just made it worse because I definitely didn't have any of that going on. But further Google searches helped me to kind of figure out how to replace this spark of joy with more helpful things. There's a YouTuber that I discovered by doing the KonMari method, and I'll leave a link up in the cards to her channel. Her name is Michelle B, and she went through the KonMari method, and she also has a lot of minimalism videos, and I found that some of her decluttering tips were very helpful, and that is that sometimes instead of figuring out if something sparks joy, you should make a list of questions to ask yourself. Asking yourself questions like, will you actually ever use or wear this? Or when was the last time that you used this or you wore this? And then maybe deeper questions. These are ones that I asked myself when I was looking at my books. Like, does it make you happy to have it? Or does it intrigue or inspire you in any way? Like, those I feel like are more helpful questions rather than just trying to figure out whether or not it sparks joy. So when I was going through and decluttering my books, and I'll leave a link up in the cards to my unhaul that was after that process, I basically asked myself with my unread books whether or not it still really intrigued me to pick it up, and if it didn't, I discarded it. And if it was something that I'd already read, I was asking myself whether or not it made me happy to still have this book on my shelves. Like, did it make enough of an impact to still keep it around? And a lot of times it didn't, and so I discarded it. So I definitely think that the sparking joy thing can be a little bit of a barrier, but I feel like these questions are a very helpful and easy way around that. So I've already touched on all of the like touchy-feely, cutesy, new agey, I still haven't picked an actual term to describe this, but all of the like quirky, weird aspects that can sometimes be like stumbling blocks for people when it comes to the KonMari process. But now I want to get into some of the actually super helpful tips that I did find while reading this book. The first of those is tidying by category and not location. KonMari talks about how we often have things of the same type scattered all over the place, and because of that we tend to acquire more of them because we forget that we already have something like it. And I think that this was most eye-opening for me when I was going through my pens, because I have most of my pens in my room, but they're kind of scattered all over the place. And when I got them all together, I realized that I had 10 to 15 green pens, and green is one of my least favorite colors. I had like 5 puke green pens that were so ugly, and I don't know why I had them. I also think just in general, it was a lot easier to go through and make decisions when I'm looking at the same type of item over and over again. For example, it was much easier for me to realize that I didn't want to own the Divergent trilogy anymore after I just picked up and held the Death Note series, which I really, really love. So it was much easier to discern which series were still inspiring and intriguing and interesting to me when I was comparing them to other series that I owned. So not only is it really helpful to have everything in one place and go through it all at one time, but it also really helps you discern which of those items are ones that you still want to have and which ones aren't. The other one I found really helpful was the rule of discarding and then organizing and keeping them completely separate. Because there were several times where I actually ended up completely moving a section of my items after discarding because I had room to put them somewhere other than where I already had them, and I wanted them to be somewhere other than where I already had them. For example, this very bottom shelf on this shelf where my magazines used to be is completely empty right now. I have all of my magazines over on my small bookcase where all of my textbooks used to be. Because those textbooks now take up one of those shelves on my small bookcase, I had room for all of my like quiz books and all of my fun books and my magazines over on the other shelf on that one, so that these shelves can be dedicated to just all of my fun books. One of the tips that was the most helpful for me was finding a place for every single item. Because I think all of us are really guilty of having items that just kind of float around. For example, my scissors, they never had one specific place that they were supposed to be. I would use them in the kitchen, and I would use them in my bedroom, and I would just leave them wherever I last used them, and I could never find them. But now I have one specific place where they go when I'm done with them, and I always know that I can find them there. It's made getting ready in the mornings so much easier because I've always been that person where I kind of like leave at the last second and I'm kind of throwing everything into my bag. And it's so much easier to get ready to go when I know exactly where my travel mug is going to be, and I know exactly where this one shirt that I'm looking for is going to be. Like stuff like that. It's so much easier to get ready in the morning when you have a specific spot for each specific item so you know exactly where it's going to be. And just in general, for me at least, finding a place for every single item makes it a lot more manageable to keep my apartment from becoming a complete and total disaster again. Because now that I've given every single item a specific spot, it's so much easier to just throw it back in that exact spot rather than being lazy and just throwing it on the floor like I normally do. You sometimes see meticulously organized spaces on like Instagram or Pinterest or something, and you're like, I can never achieve that. But actually, I found that it can be a lot easier to maintain something when it's meticulously organized, because you put that one item back in that specific spot and you don't just throw it into a random drawer. It makes it easier to find whatever you're looking for the next time, and it makes it easier to know exactly where to put an item back rather than just throwing it on the counter or throwing it in your junk drawer. The next suggestion is one that I was already doing before reading this book, but it just solidified that I absolutely love it. And it's folding things and storing them vertically. I've been folding my shirts and storing them vertically for like 2 years now, and it is so wonderful. Not only does it look really cool when you open your drawer, but it makes it really easy to find things too. Personally, I don't really like the way that KonMari folds them, because she folds it in thirds, and when you actually put it on its side in your drawer, you can't always tell what shirt it is. The way I fold it, I'm not going to describe it to you, but basically it's so that like this part of the shirt is visible, which is usually where any sort of logo is, so I can quickly see which shirt it is and pull it out. I know I found this online somewhere, so I'll leave a link down in the description to like the method of folding shirts that I use. But yeah, I don't really like her method just because you can't always see what the design is on the t-shirt. But the actual storage method is amazing. Highly recommend. Don't necessarily need to fold your socks, but definitely any t-shirts that you have, it's super awesome to fold them and store them vertically. Okay, so I've talked about the actual process itself, but now I want to move into my personal takeaways about the KonMari method. The first thing is something that I kind of learned about myself, and that is that when I buy something, I need to get exactly what I want. A lot of the time I found that things that I was discarding were like cheaper versions of something that I really wanted. For example, multiple copies of a single book, because I bought the cheap, uglier cover that I didn't necessarily want the first time, and then I eventually wanted the pretty cover and I bought the pretty cover. Or that time that I really wanted a really awesome nude lipstick, and instead of getting Max Crimmed Nude that I really wanted, I ended up buying a bunch of cheap drugstore nude lipsticks when the only one that actually ended up working was when I actually got Max Crimmed Nude. Not only is it a waste of money, but I just need to be honest with myself and know that getting the cheap fix will not satiate my desire for the more expensive item. And most of the time, it's not that much more expensive. Obviously, if it was thousands of dollars, this would not be the same thing. But like typically it's buying the cover that's like $20 versus buying the cover that's $15. I don't know, something like that. The next thing that I learned is that I need to stop buying things just because they're cheap. And once again, books are a great example, because used books are pretty inexpensive sometimes, and it's really easy to pick up a book for $1 or $2 and think, oh yeah, I'm definitely gonna read this. You're not gonna read it. My general rule of thumb going forward is that if I don't wanna buy it at full price, or at least close to full price, if full price is like way expensive, then I shouldn't be buying it at $1 or $2. Because in general, I'm willing to spend $10 on a book. So if I'm genuinely not going to shell out $10 for a book on Amazon, I shouldn't be buying it for $1 or $2 at a used bookstore, because clearly I don't want to read it enough to pay full price for it. Several of the books that I got rid of were ones that I bought for $1 or $2 at used bookstores just because they were cheap, and it's a waste of money and it's a waste of space on my bookshelves. Another thing that I learned is that while the life-changing magic of tidying up is used by a lot of minimalists for minimalist purposes, it doesn't necessarily have to be for minimalism. Marie Kondo says specifically in the book that it's impossible to tidy someone else's space. And this is basically because you don't know what sparks joy to someone else. Something that interests you or sparks joy to you could be completely boring to someone else. This is just a method that's very easy to personalize to you and to what you want to have in your life. And so it can be used for minimalist purposes, but it can also be used for non-minimalist purposes. Another major takeaway is that your space doesn't have to be perfect all the time. In the book, she talks about how she occasionally lets her space get a little messy. But it doesn't mean that your dishes have to be done all the time, or that every single item that you own has to be put away all the time, because that gets you into that mindset of a snowball effect. It's like if you take a day off of reading and you're like, oh, I already missed one day, might as well miss another just because I haven't kept up the streak. It's like, yes, your space can be clean all the time, but it doesn't have to be. In the book, she says that you actually should strive for perfection. But honestly, sure, maybe strive for perfection some of the time, but it doesn't have to be perfect all the time. Just be chill about it. You don't have to put a ton of pressure on yourself to keep your space perfect all the time. And then the last takeaway that kind of started to resonate with me near the end of the process is that I'm a collector, and I acknowledge that. But it doesn't mean that I need to have a lot of things and keep things around that don't inspire me or interest me. My instinct is to collect things. I found this big pile of fortunes from fortune cookies just laying in my wallet. I obviously have all these books behind me. I have a collection of DVDs and games. I collect things. But this process helped me to put it in perspective. Yes, I can still have my collections, and this definitely brings me joy. I love walking out of my room every morning and seeing my beautiful full bookcases. But that doesn't mean that I need to keep things in my collections that don't still intrigue me or inspire me or interest me for the sake of a collection. One day I hope to have a home library in my house that is just a room full of books. But I don't want them to be books that are just there to have a room full of books. That doesn't mean that they have to be all books that I've read, but I want them to still be books that at least intrigue me to read them if I still haven't read them. And I kind of realized that I was keeping around things, especially when it came to books, that were just there for the collection's sake. I wasn't still interested in having them, I just had them because they were part of my collection. And I feel like that was the thing that resonated the most with me, because the whole book is about getting rid of things that don't spark joy. And while my collection does spark joy, that doesn't mean that every single part of that collection did spark joy. And so it was necessary, or at least useful, to get rid of the ones that didn't intrigue me or interest me anymore. Because it's kind of like holding on to the past if you still have things around that just don't intrigue you anymore. Sometimes those were the books on my shelves that I just didn't enjoy and shouldn't have kept around for as long as I did. Sometimes those were books that I just didn't feel inspired to read anymore. And sometimes those were just random knickknacks laying around that used to mean something to me that don't anymore. So that is my wrap up for the KonMari method and the last video in my KonMari decluttering. So overall, this book might not be the most groundbreaking, mind-blowing organizational process ever, but for me, it was actually pretty life-changing, and that might be just because my apartment was a complete and total disaster, but it was something that really, really helped me. As always, I will leave links down in the description to my blog, Twitter, and Goodreads. Please add me as a friend on Goodreads. I would love to be friends with all of you. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. Thank you so much for watching.